Hey, good afternoon, and welcome to episode 5 of this season's Boss Talk. And we wanted to do something a little bit different. Since we had a bunch of episodes, we thought there would be some interest in going back and just talking about some common themes, maybe some common issues, things that went well, things that maybe didn't go well, talking about IRP stuff. Just a myriad, right? Have kind of an agenda, but who knows where it goes. I'd like to introduce our panel, but first, a reminder that if you are a certified chief officer and you want credit for COPDI, then you need to sign in now with your name and your fire service ID number, and then, of course, remember at the end, sign out with that as well. I'm going to be the moderator today, and I'll be trying to keep track of folks asking any questions as we go along. So again, we said we wanted to take some time and just go over the Boss Talk episodes that we've had. With us today, we have our normal moderator, Captain Brady Miller, to my right, your left. We have Assistant Chief Matt Carrigan. He's going to be speaking from the operations division side of the house. And we have Division Chief Charles Bailey to my left, who's going to be speaking from the training perspective, policy perspective, that kind of focus. So let's go back and think how this all got started, right? So a little over a year ago, some folks got together. They thought that there would be a reasonably good idea to, hey, let's try to put some training stuff together whereby we look at incidents, issues, actions taken that don't fit what happens between policy and training, right? So you learn stuff at the training school, you learn stuff in policies, you go to field and you run calls. We wanted to gear it towards our company officers and towards folks who are aspiring to be company officers. And again, that is the goal of the Challenges in the Street program. There's something in it for everybody, but the focus is that. And then we took a chance on Boss Talk. And Boss Talk, we decided that, hey, it would be interesting to hear from the actual unit officers who took actions on incidents. A lot of times, the only thing we see in the field is a written after action report that somebody would print out perhaps at lineup and review whatever. And we thought, you know what, it would be interesting to hear from the folks. Why did they do X, Y, Z? What were their thoughts? What were things that inhibited their operations? And that has been quite a good success, a big success. And we appreciate everybody who has taken the time to contribute to that, right? It's not easy, willing to put your actions up before others. Everybody has done a really good job of talking about that, and we appreciate that. I will say, from my perspective, it has gone way further and way better than I ever thought that would happen. So, and Captain Miller, I'm sure he'll speak to that as well. So the plan for today is we are not going to go through each episode. You would have seen what those were. Hopefully you watched all of them or as many as you can. But now that we have a number under our belt, you think about some of them, right? We've had fires in townhouses. We've had incidents that occurred in single-family dwellings. We had vehicle collisions. We've had some serious incidents. We've had some others that, weren't as serious. We had some fatalities, just a wide variety of incidents where company officers had to take pretty fast action early on, talking about those first arriving units. So what I'd like to start off with is I'd like to start with looking back at the episodes, and looking back at the Boss Talk, what have you been pleased with? What did you think of any common themes about things that went well, why maybe they did that, whatever, right? It's like 4 folks sitting around the kitchen table talking. So I'm going to start with Captain Miller, right? So Captain Miller, right, you've been the moderator of all these. Give me some thoughts about being the moderator, good thoughts up to this point, right? And from while you're a company officer, I'm going to ask you from a company officer perspective, those incidents we've been through, thoughts about the stuff that has gone well, and in your eyes, why that would have happened.
So first, thank you, Chief. As far as moderating this goes, a year ago, a little over a year ago when we started, we didn't really have a fine direction of where, I don't think, of where we wanted this to go. We allowed it to evolve. And I think here we are a little more than a year later. I think between you and I, we kind of know the direction that we're taking both the Boss Talks and the challenges in the streets. So the Boss Talks, what I've noticed about them, it has struck me most, and I've spent a good portion of my career here at the training academy as an officer, truthfully, is people's willingness to share their story. It's hard to do, especially when things didn't go exactly like you think they should go. It's not easy. But at the end of the day, when you listen to everybody's story, my goal, personal goal, as the moderator, as an officer, that if I feel like one person, firefighter, doesn't matter who it is, has said or turned to their officer and said, hey, Lieutenant, hey, Captain, what would you do, what would we do in that same situation? A car on fire in a garage of an occupied townhouse. How would we handle that situation? That discussion alone, to me, has made this entire Boss Talks worthwhile. And I think that's happening. The feedback that I'm getting at the company level is that is happening. It's spawning roundtable discussions, and that's great. Some of the themes that I have seen, or that I'm just going to talk about, really align with the IRP, that I see things going correct when we're following the IRP, when we're not just jawing on the radio just to talk, when we're not jockeying positions, when we're giving good layouts, when we're giving good initial on-scene reports, when we're accounting for the occupant status. Things are generally speaking going the way they're supposed to go. So from a company officer, from the moderator, that's what I'm seeing, and that's what I'm seeing going right in all of these, in the stories that we've heard so far.
So I got a follow-up question now I think about it. So you had been involved in the COLAs,
Yes.
right? The initial COLA.
Yes.
So I had been involved early on with Officer Candidate School under Chief Carr, right? And out of Officer Candidate School came the Officer Training Officer Program that lasted for a while, right? So I'd liken this somewhat to that, just in a different format. How do you see, I'll say specifically the Boss Talk, how do you see the Boss Talk tying into, adding on to, enhancing, being detrimental, I don't know, as it relates to the COLA program? You're not in COLA anymore, right? That's been passed off this year.
COLA
right?
is now Chief Bailey, I believe, is your division leads that whole, the training academy took COLA over, correct?
Right.
Or kind of guides COLA. I think honestly, we are a group of people that is different than we have ever been. You know, society has changed, the fire department changed, our call load has changed, the personnel that are attracted to the occupation, they've evolved, society has evolved. And I think that I like that. I'm excited about that, honestly. I see it in recruit class too when I do recruit school, and our approach to training changes or needs to change. And I think this has kind of been a change. You know, it would be great to have acquired structures again. I don't know why we don't, but there's probably a reason why we don't. So a lot of times we're forced to sit around the table to discuss things. And this is a good opener to that. Probably doesn't talk about as many things, parts of the organization, as a COLA program would, or does. I don't know what the current syllabus for COLA is. I know what it was when you did it, Chief, and when I did it. But I like this direction. I think it's moving in the right direction.
I have a question. I'm going to hold that off.
Okay.
So actually, for the folks watching, right, as a reminder, in case you hopped in and you haven't been before, if you have questions of anybody, right, you can have a marked direct question to somebody in the panel. You're welcome to do that, or a general question. Type that in. I'm the moderator for that, so I'm watching that on the laptop here, and I'll catch that and ask as we go. All right, so I'm going to answer that same question I posed to Captain Miller to myself, right? So I'm going to say I have not been the moderator of these. I've helped organize, get them together. We brainstormed, whatever. I am very pleased with the progress of it. Like I said, it's done way more than what I ever thought, and I knew that it was going to be good when we had the first episode, and I watched the chat, and people were talking about the stuff that we were talking about. And when I went around as the battalion chief in the different stations, people were talking about it. And even now, right now, it's even more pronounced when I'm the overtime guy in some other station or some other battalion. I can't tell you how many times, especially in that first week, that I roll in through the station, whatever, and they're watching it. I don't think they're just doing it because they know Chief Davis is driving by today. I think they're doing it because they want to do it. So in my mind, that's been a big success. And I think from an organizational perspective that this is an avenue to allow additional growth in our company officers, right? And Captain Miller talked about telling your story. That's one of the things that I hem on, right? Is you watch people, we watch all kinds of YouTube videos. Watch anybody, right? They're watching a YouTube video of some fire in XYZ city, what they did, what they didn't do. We have our own really good stories to tell. We have tons of stories to tell, right? There was a second alarm fire yesterday morning. There's a story there, I'm sure, from a couple company officers, but if you weren't there and it's not your shift or you're somewhere located elsewhere in the county, you didn't listen to it, you don't know anything about that story, and it goes away. So our goal was to try to tell some of those stories. From a battalion chief incident commander, right, so I'm going to probably marry up to some of the same thoughts, right, when folks are following the policy as it's written out, even when we had older policies, right, I've been around for a while. If I'd have gone to one of these fires as a captain, as a lieutenant, as a sergeant coming out of Bethesda, there would have been a policy that we followed, and if we didn't follow it, somebody's coming to talk to me about it, especially if it didn't go well. So from an incident commander perspective, I'm going to tell you that when folks follow the policy as best they can for the incident that they're going to and the policy fits, things work out well. I tell you what drives me crazy, and you all probably pretty much know it, right, is the bidding on the call stuff. If you're bidding on a Chief Davis call, you know my answer. That answer is remain available unless you're sitting in front of the building, because it just jacks up everybody else, especially the engines. Very difficult for them to overcome because they've had a plan to begin with, right? But in terms of our episodes, right, folks were aggressive. They took action, right? All these actions we saw people take, they had some difficult circumstances. Some, they had to rescue somebody, reported trapped in the building, all those things. Everybody was faced with having to make quick decisions early on, in some cases with limited resources. So I've been pleased with all of those. I think that's all been positive stuff that's come out of there. And I really want to say thank you for the folks who have committed their story to our program. There'll be more to come. Next month will be interesting as well, but we appreciate those who are willing to tell that story. And it's been very respectful of the folks watching that everybody realizes, hey, that could be me, right? All right, so I'm going to ask the same questions of the two chief officers above me. First will be Chief Carrigan, representing the operations side of the house, although he can talk about anything that he wants to as well. So, Chief Carrigan, program, content, whatever, actions taken, thoughts about some of the stuff that has been good about it.
So, thank you for the invite. I think the program is overall, it's really good. It does exactly what both of you have said. It gets people talking. It gets people to consider the actions that they've taken. And I can tell you from being a unit officer, being a command officer, now a supervisor of command officers, if you will, there is not a fire that goes in most incidents that goes that I don't have concerns about some of the actions I've taken, right? And it's maybe you didn't recognize something, or you thought you saw something that your brain just said that's the real picture, when you find out later it's not. So I think these type of talks are great to help bring that out, help get people to consider their own cognitive limitations, if they will. One of the things that I've talked to Captain Miller about is when when people are talking and they're describing their actions in these talks, they should be able to relate those actions back to something in the IRP. How were the actions that were taken by a unit officer supported in the IRP? So I think as that starts coming out and gets incorporated, or your talk amongst yourselves, like, it's perfectly acceptable and understandable to say, talk to your own crew, your driver, we should have done something different. Kind of along the same lines of what Captain Miller was saying, if we can get people at the station level to start talking, then that's good. So other positive stuff, crews are engaging. They're engaging at all levels in this department with the bidding on the calls. And while that is a huge problem on certain calls, fires in specific, crews are also bidding on the EMS calls because they're the closest unit. So they're taking that doctrine statement philosophy of a duty to act, and they're implementing it at all levels.
That is a positive.
It's a huge positive, right?
And it's the busy stations, right, where you would say they're willing to take another ambulance call, right?
They're already getting beaten.
Yes,
and,
right.
They're stepping up and taking these EMS calls. But the problem is, I guess the explanation is, that just puts another EMS unit in service. Whereas the bidding on a box alarm, you have units arriving staggered, out of position, out of order, and we don't really have a good department instilled discipline of how we manage that. I think it's acceptable to switch the first and the second due engine, or the third and the fourth due engine on water supply, or the first and the second truck, front to back, in a pristine world. But the third due engine taking the second due engine's job because they got there second really sets up a problem of where that second water supply is going. We can get into more specifics about that.
Right.
So I guess I answered your question, but I gave you a little bit of good and I don't want to say bad, because it's not bad. It's learning, right? And I think that's really the intent of this.
That is.
It is,
Yeah.
right. That brings us to Chief Bailey. Same question. Your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I have to echo what everyone else has said, because it's really important, this notion that people are talking. If you look at the incident response policy, specifically the operational doctrine, in this case, it speaks about accountability, and it breaks it into two different things. And on one level, it's a unit officer knowing where his or her people are, and what they're doing. But there's this other part, and it talks about being responsible for your actions. I challenge you to think about accountability in that way, and what does it mean to be responsible? And one of the ideas I use is this notion that you're willing to tell your story in ways that are beneficial to others. So there is some risk involved here, or hazards involved when people are talking, especially like right now, it's a live show. You're trying to be really, really careful not to say the wrong things. And I guess if I'm a unit officer and I'm just coming back from a 2-alarm fire and I'm talking about it, I'm under that same pressure to try to say the right thing. The value to the organization from people speaking honestly and freely sort of outweighs the hazard of saying the wrong thing. And from an organizational perspective, hearing the ground truth, as Chief Gallo would always say, the ground truth, hearing that ground truth really helps us to go and compare what's happening in real life to the design cases that were put into the incident response policy. what's really important from this perspective is 2 points that I think have to come out early. The incident response policy, whether it's for structure fires or automobile collisions or metro roadway incidents, they were built around specific use cases, right? And if you don't understand what they were built around, it's really hard to know when you're within the limits of them. And what we're seeing, or what I'm seeing, is as we listen to people tell their stories, what seems to be a disconnect between the policy and real life is more often a disconnect between an understanding of what the policy was designed for, right? That the policy function as designed, and how the policy is understood. So as I look to this, I think it is a great benefit to have an opportunity to start closing that gap between what the design was and what the understanding is. And I think you don't ever get to a point where that gap is closed completely, but the closer we get to that, the better off we are. So as this continues, we learn more and more, and things get better and better, or have the potential to get better and better. I think that answers your question.
All right, good. All right, thanks. Anybody want to add anything positive that you thought about after somebody else? Good to go. All right, so obviously after the positive, this would be things that I don't want to say were troubling or negative, right? But they just maybe caused you to raise an eyebrow. You're like, I don't know about that. And those all can be worse than others, right? So as an incident commander, I may be listening to a call that's not mine. I'm like, man, I wonder why they did that. That sounds strange. I think they should be doing this. I'm not there. I don't know what's going on. I don't see the picture. But I think all of us are that way, right? When that full assignment gets dropped, you know most of the firehouses are listening to that, and they are making some judgments in many cases based upon what they would do in similar situations. I'm sure folks taking promotional exams, getting ready to, they are listening to every one of those calls. A bunch of folks getting ready to take the battalion chief's test. I am sure that there are a bunch of them out there with a command chart, listening to the call, jotting stuff down as they go. What would they do in this incident? What would they do when this is what happened, right? I would hope, in fact, I would hope they're doing that, because that's going to be part of probably good preparation for that type of assessment. So that being said, we go to Captain Miller from the company officer perspective, right? Thoughts on things that made you raise an eyebrow here or there, and like, I'm not sure about that.
So I don't know if I have a lot of, and I don't want to call them negatives, but I don't know what other word to use, negatives to the stories that we've heard. I've been taken back a couple of times by some statements by people, but then they've given the opportunity to explain themselves. Okay, I understand. I also understand, maybe because I'm in the role right now, that I'm making a decision based on a split second of arriving somewhere. You know, I don't have the time to analyze what I'm looking at. I see a snapshot and I make a decision. I'm hoping that it's right. Fortunately, I feel I've been right more than I've been wrong. But I don't want to say that people are doing a bunch of wrong things, because I don't think that's the case. I can tell you that I am, and we're talking about the IRP. We've brought it up about, running out of order. And I use this example, and I've used it in COLA, that, I'm riding the front seat of engine 702, and I look at the board when I'm going out of the firehouse, and I see that I'm the second wagon or third wagon on the run, or I'm looking at my MDC, and that's all I focus on when I'm going down the road. I'm not interested in focusing on switching the running order up. And I understand that, a fire truck can break down, whatever can happen. Somebody can be in a different position and we can change and I can adapt. But if I'm not forced to adapt, I don't want to adapt. And I take that to heart. I talk about it with the guys behind me. I talk about it when we have drills at Station 2. I talk about it at other firehouses. That just is what makes things go right in Brady's world. And I think that that's a good general statement for the fire department. Because there aren't a lot of rules sometimes. Sometimes we have to adapt a little bit. And that's okay. But if I'm not forced to do that, I don't want to do that. And I see that through these series. That same chain of events through these, the consistencies of running with crews that you know, having your regular driver.
Right.
It sounds very odd, but
Right.
to Captain Miller, having my master firefighter drive me regularly is very important to my success, which I think in turn relates to the event success. So those can be some negatives. I don't think they're glaring negatives. I understand that that's not always the case, but
So you've been the moderator on all of these, this just came to mind, and you always ask, or have been asking at the end, if you were to run this call, what would you do differently, right? And all four of us sitting here have probably run all of the significant calls we've ever run in our life. I'm pretty sure we've run them again, right, in our head, saying, if I went to that call again, I'm doing this differently, right? It may have been something as simple as not lock myself out of the command vehicle, right, to, I should have took this line to the basement instead of where it went, right? So, what are your thoughts on their answers? So you had a bunch of
so I
answers.
like that question,
Yeah,
honestly,
right.
and,
That's a good
it's no secret that I just had an event that was on YouTube that,
Right.
probably didn't go as I initially planned when I pulled up to the guy
Yep.
to the event, and I beat myself up, for 2 or 3 days afterwards. What should I have done different? What could I have done different? What would have happened if I would have reacted different? And there's 100 roads that it could have gone down. And I think Chief Bailey, he actually said it this morning, that something as simple as explaining, this is why I'm here. Would that have made that entire event go away?
So what do you think about the answers? And I'm not looking for a specific answer, right? But those folks, I think everybody who you've asked has given, this is what I'd do differently. So what do you have to say to that? What do you
I
think?
like that. I like that self-assessment. I think it's important. I think it's part of growth.
Right.
I don't want to say we ought to be our own worst critic, but sometimes that's really important. And again, I can take it from 2 weeks ago with me. I've spent a weekend beating myself up over potentially a pretty dumb thing.
All right, I'm going to answer the same question just from my perspective. I'll keep it short. So I was not at any of those incidents other than the Featherwood one. That was the initial boss talk, right? So I can't put myself in those folks' shoes. But a couple things that just caused me to raise an eyebrow, right? I'm not a fan of people working by themselves, right? When we send a crew member to go do something by ourselves, in some ways we set ourselves up for that. I always use the squad driver, right, who does utilities many times. It's a squad driver by themselves. I don't know, right? Hopefully, maybe not so much anymore. But in the other activities, right, in the IDOH, I think it's just not the best practice, so we all know that. So I find that a little, I don't like that, right? And then I'll go back to the bidding thing. It's just been that way my whole time as a command officer, simply because early on, an incident that I was trying to manage just got all jacked up by people bidding, and at the end of the day, the outcome was nowhere near what I had intended to be. So that still is a pet peeve of mine. Sorry.
Chief, I think we should add the communication component to that. I would like to add the communication component to that.
Go. So-
Meaning, we need to all be
Oh,
on the same page.
Yes, right.
The way I talk to you and the way you
Yep.
talk to me, we need to understand each
Right.
other and our intent.
So you brought up a good point in that a lot of these incidents was the regular crew, right? I don't think we've had one where it's been the detail company officer yet. I think it's all been the regular assigned people, which doesn't mean that you don't still communicate, right? I still think about, you probably still gonna confirm something, right? Hey, guys, we're second due, remember this, or, here's your job, or we only got 3 people, this is what you're gonna have to do. I'm taking this, you're taking that, whatever, right? Not necessarily assuming that everybody is exactly good with your plan. So I think that is important. Forgot about that. All right, so Chief Carrigan, so you have a more broad perspective, right? More bird's eye view of what's been going on. I don't want to say, I don't have an easy way of saying concerns, negatives, what, I'll just say, right, cause you to say, type thing.
I would say overall omission, right? If I can it's not wrong, it's just omission. So, omission. I'm gonna make sure I'm enunciating that correctly. We get it. Thanks. Yeah, call Louise. Tell her. The omission of critical tasks, right? And that's, we're talking about the water supply. If water supply is not completed, if secondary water supply is not established and completed, if ground ladders aren't thrown, if backup lines aren't put in place, and predominantly we're talking about structure fires. But if some of those, and I've heard variances of those comments, and sometimes not even from the participant, because in the past you've had a participant sitting here, and then you've played an audio, and something in the audio has gotten an audio for that incident. Something in the audio is like, well, that should have been, if I was a battalion chief, I would have questioned that, right? Like, why did that happen? And nobody can speak to it because that unit officer is not here. Some of the participants, and I can't put specific incidents in place, but have omitted doing certain things. And I'd just like to understand, like, if you don't throw the ground ladders, I'd like to understand a little bit more about that. If you're showing up on a truck company, you showed up with ladders. That is one of your foremost duties. There's really not, if you show up on an engine company and you don't lay out or you don't do certain things, you might as well have shown up on a ride-on bus. We could have got the same thing accomplished. So I really need the unit officers to do what the function they're sent to do in this arena where they're talking about their actions. And again, it's one of those things where you're gonna, it's hard. You're owning up to something that sure, maybe if you had 2 more seconds to think about it, you wouldn't have done. Or seeing the bigger picture after the smoke is cleared, if you will, had reevaluated your ultimate decisions. So just a little bit more explanation. So I don't want to say it's necessarily wrong, but the omission of information to make me as a broad scope person in my role now as a duty chief and as the operations executive officer make me question. I'm constantly on the phone with the duty chief, 8 o'clock at night, 2 in the morning, 6 in the morning. If I'm listening to the call, something doesn't sound right. Like, why isn't this thing going to a second alarm? You've got a fire on a lower floor of an occupied garden apartment with it 1 or 2 floors above you. We need to start moving this along, or we're going to be behind the 8 ball, and we won't be successful. And my success at that point is concerned about the life hazard. So on a global view, I'm looking at things when I'm watching these. When I'm watching these segments, I'm more specific because somebody has said something. So that I would just say the omission of getting more information. And again, that's why the question of how are your actions supported by the IRP?
Yeah, right. Okay. That takes us to Chief Bailey. Same question.
There's a lot of interesting stuff happening here today. So I think I heard you a couple times.
I think you may have to speak up a little more.
Oh.
Or,
sorry. Hello. I think I've heard this comment a couple of times, right? things are moving so fast, I'm making a decision in a split second. And I want to make 2 points about that. Don't ever make a decision in a split second when you can buy yourself 30 seconds to make that same decision. And I think we put ourselves under too much pressure sometimes. It is going to be very rare over the course of your career to find a situation where absolute immediate action right now is required or else somebody dies. Whereas if I took 15 or 20 seconds to think through or process a better or, some different action, things will tend to be better. We should take a minute to save a minute, okay? So I think that's very important. The other thing that's important, we keep talking about this incident response policy, is that the incident response policy was designed for variance. You will find no other policy in the continental United States and maybe even across the globe where in the very first pages we tell you how to break it and the three-pronged test you need to do to justify deviating from that policy. That's unique to us. But that policy was designed with the understanding that people are going to make mistakes. And if you think about it the right way, if engine 1 is having a really, really bad day, the job of engine 2 is to fix that and to make it look like the decisions engine 1 made were the best of all possible decisions. And it's not about the individual and it's not about the company. As Chief McDonald says all the time, you got to think in terms of the box alarm. But just to roll back and kind of quickly go through some of these, the things that have given me pause, most of them have been hit already, but the idea, and we have got to stop this, I'll be a little bit more forceful, but the notion that the unit officer does not have to provide a direction to their crews because their crews are experienced or they know what they're doing is a failed approach. You have got to take the 15 or 20 seconds to have a conversation with your crews and tell them what you think's going on, what you generally plan to do about it and why, the sorts of things we should be looking out for. Be careful. I think there's a hole in the floor, right? And probably most important, you as the unit officer have to open the door and allow your personnel the opportunity to speak up. And you can do that by saying something to the effect of, does anybody see anything different than what I just explained to you, right? As simple as a 15-second brief in the front yard. I call it a tactical brief. And you will find that it will save you a lot of time in the long run. I think that's super important. Chief Carrigan hit on this notion about, I think, ground ladders and this notion of omission. That's on my list, too. We ask you to do things and say things and make note of things in the policy because that policy is based on a tremendous amount of actual experience in this county. And there are words and phrases in that policy that come from kitchen tables like this all over the county. And we could go through page by page, right? And there's the Sanford Protocol because she pointed something out, or the Radcliffe Protocol because, Cherubusco. These things are tied to real life incidents. And so you have to pay attention to that and you have to stick with that or else we're going to be in trouble. There is a reason why we ask the second due engine to back up the first due engine, and there is a reason why we ask the first due engine to lay out. And if you can take this as a general rule, you'll be better off. Don't ever break a rule if you can't explain why that rule exists, right? Chief Davis talked about this notion about people working alone. The utility control for the rescue squad on a structure fire was de-emphasized in the policy specifically to try to limit the amount of times those guys are going inside the house alone to isolate an electric box. You do not have to be a squad guy to go flip a breaker switch, okay? There are no circumstances, and I'll state it more strongly, in the absence of an immediate life hazard where one should be operating inside an environment that's immediately dangerous to life or health alone. And that goes beyond Montgomery County's policy. It's actually codified in OSHA regulations as well. And if somebody gets hurt really seriously or dies in a structure fire, we're going to have a hard time explaining that. You can't do that, right? You cannot operate by yourself inside a structure. That applies to the safety officer too. That applies to the battalion chief who's assigned to an interior position and has to traverse through space, we have got to think about how we do that, and they should be paired up, or at least in the general vicinity with other crews. We talked about bidding on calls. I'll take you back to, my job here today is to take everything back to some policy. You go back to Fire Chief's General Order 9-20, and we don't want you building structure fires. We just don't want you. Why? And I think if you take all the things you guys have said so far and tie them together, whether it was the policy we had in 1991, I think we had a couple then, a rural house and a urban house, different assignments that went with it, or the safe structural firefighting policy, we had like 2, maybe 3 iterations of that, and now this one. What the policy does is it creates a series of shared expectations. If everybody follows the policy, we kind of know what things are going on and the bases are covered. And you also have to think of this policy as a risk management document. We did a lot of that thinking for you in advance, and if you don't follow it, what you're doing is you're opening up unanticipated gaps between our risk management process and reality, and it reduces the ability of the company officer and the incident commander to make adjustments when things go sideways, right? So I think those things are important. And the last point I will make is you have to trust the policy, trust the process, and where you think there's something that needs to be fixed, there's also a process for that. And I would really love to start getting some feedback on where people think there's their breakdown. I've heard one, and it involves the way we manage the elevator keys. And all these years, I've heard one complaint, and it's about managing elevator keys on the high rises, and that just came up 2 days ago.
So may I ask a question based on, from one of the authors of the current IRP, you, leader of the group.
Yeah.
I was involved too.
Yeah, I'm not taking all the blame, buddy.
I'm going to put it all on you, though, directly. So, from your position, and then from the training, from a training perspective, do you believe, and I'm going to ask the same question to Chief Carrigan from an operational standpoint, when we have the policies in place, but when you look behind the curtain, when you watch things like this, when you get feedback, when you talk to people in the field, do you believe that the intent of our IRP is fully understood across the board or in operations? And if not, what could we do? What could I do as a company officer? What could Chief Davis do as a battalion chief to correct that? Is there an opportunity to enhance?
So let's break that down. Is the incident response policy fully understood, the intent? And I would say probably not fully. It is not the sort of thing that's been institutionalized in the departmental thought process. Do I think that people try really hard? Absolutely. Absolutely. And do I think they get it right in terms of first engine does this, second engine does this? More often than not, they get it right. Then you ask the follow-up question to that, which is why. And I think it's because it's for the same reason when I took my boy's 10, and when he was 7, I was trying to teach him fractions, right? And it ended in frustration and for both of us. Why? It's probably because he wasn't ready for fractions. Probably should have taught him how to add first, right? But the point is, I think when the policy came out, the department, it represented a significant change in the way we actually conceive of the universe and the way we just kind of execute a mindset on the back end. And when we first did the training programs, it was hard enough to get people's attention and keep them awake to get through the first one does this, second one does this. Nevertheless, to spend hours and hours speaking about the intent. What you know, and Chief Carrigan knows, and a couple others, there was like 6 or 8 of us as part of that process. Career, volunteer, didn't matter. The process, the final product with us took over almost a year. There was a year before that with Chief Richards and Chief Gallo right? And then there was probably 18 iterations that, before that. There's a lot behind it. It's gonna take some time. At the end of the day, what's most important to me right now, from my perspective, is that people, if you got a question about it and you don't trust it, ask that question up the chain, and I dare anybody to say that those questions don't get answered in a timely fashion, because they do. But other than that, trust it and follow it, because it tends to work out more often than not.
And to you, Chief Carrigan, not really the policy, but more operationally, if you use this program, and this comes from Chief Davis, to peek behind the curtain about what I guess the organizational's intent is, and then what's actually happening in the street, is that do they coincide?
It's a hard question, I think. I think that the membership has read and understands the language that's written. I think there's probably some application problems, and I'll get into it, but if you think back, even before this iteration of the IRP or incident response policy, you know, that we introduced things, and I've talked about this to various people. We've introduced things like, one time we talked about wind-driven fires, right? Then we talked about, several times later, several months later, maybe years later, we talked about exterior hose streams. Then we talked about compartmentation. Then we talked about whatever the next thing that came along was. When we got to the IRP, we kind of included in all that thought process into the IRP, right? Fast water, you know, all that, you know, the focus on
Basements,
life safety. In addition to what Chief Bailey said about the utilities being controlled, was de-emphasized. It wasn't only de-emphasized for the rescue squad driver. It was de-emphasized because I'm not worried about if the water and the electric controlled if I still haven't gotten a primary search called.
Certainly.
Right? And there was a lot of that. You know, command officers or you know, the primary search never being called, you know, declared positive or negative or whatever, and the utilities are being controlled, right? We've got this hierarchy of needs, right, and it's life safety, right, first. What we never did, going back, is said how compartmentation, wind-driven fires, and exterior hose streams are all, can all happen at one fire.
Potentially tied
Right?
together.
Yeah, and everything that we've told the individual firefighters to do to avoid that, if an occupant has miraculously done the same thing, they may be alive in there as well. And the case in point is that New York City fire that
Vandalia Avenue.
in the mid-'90s that started the wind-driven conversation fire. It happened in Baltimore County with Falcon Island.
Right.
Right, the flow path, that was the other one, flow path. The firefighters were in the flow path, the occupants were not, and they were behind interior doors, and they survived. So, all that's in our IRP. I think people know that. Dare I say that we have not done a good job or an adequate job of trying to get that message out there in a cohesive fashion. We're almost 2,000 operational people, all told, and that's a hard thing. One of the things that Chief Bailey and I have discussed recently is what method people use to get the information. Is it these boss talks? Is it you know,
The internet, whatever.
the internet? Information from our department. There's probably 30 different ways you can get information from this department. Through various email groups, MCFRS announcements, through challenges in the street. I don't know that we can clean it up just in the way we all operate today, but,
So, I'd like to move on to, I'll say, our final discussion point. I don't know where this takes us. We had promised kinda that we would come back to Lorraine Avenue just to close it out from the Boss Talk perspective. And so Captain Miller was the moderator there. and I handled some question stuff. I think what we'd like to hear from the other two chiefs are any, I'll say, I don't want to say final thoughts, because I think there might be more to come department-wise, but from our level of the Boss Talks thing, any thoughts on Lorraine Avenue, good, bad, indifferent? I'll offer the one thought that I had, and I don't let you guys go, and really, it wasn't so much to the outcome and what happened was, it was just one of those shift change fires. I'm never a fan of that. I go back to the Sergeant Carter of Washington DC, right? I was part of help planning funeral and all that, right? And when you read that story, right, that can happen anywhere. And just the notice of a significant incident happening, a shift change, there's a lot of moving parts. And Lorraine Avenue, right, fire, it's shift change. There could be a lot of issues going on. Even yesterday's fire, right, it's shift change. Who do I have from a command perspective? Is my roster right? Is it not, who's doing what, when, where? Are we riding heavy because the other shift hopped on? We got 5 on the truck instead of 3. That all starts off not the normal process. And that was my thought of Lorraine, absent however Lorraine went out. So I'm going to offer this up to Chief Carrigan first, and then Chief Bailey second. Go.
So from the boss talk, and I'll talk about it in that context, it was, again, I didn't understand, so some of the omission of information from that session made me ask some questions, and it was one of the first times I had a conversation with Captain Miller about, one of the questions has to be, tell me how your actions line up with the IRP.
Right.
Right? That's where I'm gonna focus all my questions out of the IRP and the deliverable or defendable, deliberate, and communicated. If you've got that and it makes sense with the priorities and the objectives and how we're gonna achieve that, I'm gonna be okay. But I would say some of the omission of some of the information. I'm in contact with Chief Fitch about the significant incident report on that. I don't want to comment on that as of yet, so I'll just leave it at that. There were some questions, I think some of the questions came out of here.
Yeah.
Some of the actions just made me go, well, why would that have happened?
Yeah.
Right? And
I listened to it on my way home, right, and I'm driving home listening to it on my Zello app, and again, I'm not there. I didn't hear the initial dispatch. I hop on after the writ or whatever, and I'm like, I'm sure anybody else was. I wonder why they're doing that, right? And of course, that could be on an event that nothing happened of any consequence, right? Wonder why they did that. Why did they say that? Why did they pick that water supply?
So I actually showed up down there that morning.
Yeah.
I was getting ready to leave, go to work, and Chief Demetriadis called me and said he had a Mayday going on, and by the time I started going down there, there was a second Mayday. So when I showed up, the first thing I did was went to the command officer and just opened the door and said, "Have you guys got it?" Because they closed out the Mayday.
Right.
But then I wanted to physically put eyes on. He had enough. I needed to put eyes on the people that were involved in the Mayday, the people that actually went through the floor, and see where we're going next, right? Because there's this. If we're going to the hospital, if we're doing all the, or worse, right, there's gonna be a ramp up, and there's gotta be a component that manages that outside of the incident.
Right.
So Chief Demetriadis.
It's hard to start that 30 minutes later.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And, it's so when I was there physically, I really did not focus too much on the incident. Found out that the people were out, found out where the firefighters were, found out, how much fire was still in the house. Do we still have a potential third Mayday getting ready to happen? But, quickly that was determined that this incident was ramping down, so.
Chief Bailey, you probably have the final thoughts here,
Well,
unless we cut you off.
well, yeah, you raised the flag if I take too long, because I do have a few thoughts, and I like to preface them by saying it's really easy for me, from the comfort of my couch, with the benefit of retrospect and time to go through the incident response policy and pull out specific references and match them to what people said at a given time, it's easy for me to look and appear right. Like, I got this, right? What I recognize and I acknowledge is that you are indeed people faced with a challenging situation. And it's more challenging, I think, than you guys give it credit for. And I think there's 4.5 reasons for that. I'm not going to go long. Fires at that time in the morning, you have to fight sleep inertia. You cannot, the human body has limitations. You don't wake up at 4 or 5 in the morning from REM sleep and are 100% cognitively prepared. It doesn't happen. It's called sleep inertia. It takes you a minute to wake up, and when you have to leave Company 16 and go to Lorraine Avenue, it's probably true that you're not awake by the time you get there. You have to do something at the local level to build yourself in some space, right? First, you have to recognize it as a challenge. Then you got to find out how to overcome that challenge. When I worked at Company 2, we had that same problem. It was called Maple Avenue, 7600 block of Maple Avenue. Maybe you changed it, but map page 9 was always in my helmet because there was no time to look it up. It was in your helmet. You wake up at 7620, right? And you got to refer to the floor plan because there was no time. Sleep deprivation is the next big thing that I don't think we give any credit to, but a firefighter at the end of a 24-hour shift on any unit that's doing any work, be it medical or fire work, you've been awake for 24 hours. You probably shouldn't even drive your car home, right? You should probably take a nap before you leave. Sleep deprivation really degrades your cognitive ability, and we got to take that. Chief Davis has spoken about mixed crews. I challenge you to go find me a NIOSH after action report where it doesn't mention work trade, overtime, or some other mixing of crews. Add to the fact that you didn't have a chance to have lineup and establish your daily expectations with your personnel, and you got a problem. Issue 4 and 4B are about pressure. Company 16 has got time pressure, 90 seconds, I think they said, from the time they leave the station to the time they're laying out. There's a lot of information to process in 90 seconds, right? And then there's the social pressure, Chief. You talked about everybody turning on their radio, and I think if we could boil it down and be 100% honest with ourselves, a lot of things are said or not said on the radio because we're worried about what everybody else is going to say. I suffered from that for years. I worried about what you dudes were going to say. Good for me now. I really don't, right? What do I need to do? How can I be most effective? Okay? I feel long-winded, but I'm on a roll. Let me go for a few minutes. We talked about accountability.
Please continue.
And what's really important about Lorraine Avenue. I'm going to answer the question just bluntly. What gives me the right to comment about it? I wasn't there. That's great. We're all accountable to somebody, and the weakest defense the firefighter could ever offer is the kitchen table defense, right? You weren't there. How can you judge? It's because the judgment of whether or not I'm doing a good job, I don't get to decide that. The fire chief decides that. And whether he's doing a good job, the county executive, the CAO decide that, right? So we are all accountable to something that is beyond ourselves, and that's very important. That's why we get to talk about that today from these perspectives. So when I look back at this, it's not to nitpick. As much as you're accountable to me, I'm accountable to you as a unit officer. If I'm in possession of some information or I have some notion about how you can be more in line with the expectations of the organization and I don't share that with you, what kind of person does that make me? I have an obligation to share that with the organization, and, well, that's kind of what we're doing here today. We talked about responsibility earlier, and here, it was on my list, so I went back, I kind of just hit it. We have a responsibility when we hear things that don't line up. We have a responsibility to speak to those things and speak to them directly. The reason why we don't sit in this room and go radio statement by radio statement by radio statement is because no one wants to be on the other end of that, right? So where there's a need to talk to this guy or that guy or this other person specifically, we will do that, but we'll do that in private, just like, I mean, I think most people would want. The next big thing I want to talk about is orientation. And if you think about risk, forget the math that goes with it. Think about risk as the degree to which you face uncertainty. Take that concept and you say, the more uncertainty I'm facing, the higher the risk, the less uncertainty I have, the lower the risk. How does the incident response policy address risk? The first due engine we tell you to do a circle check, right? What's the purpose of that? To gather information. So when I hear people say, I don't pay attention to the MDC, I don't listen to all that stuff, you have to. That's how you gather information. That's part of the risk reduction or the risk management process. And what we know is that basement fires are so dangerous, that unidentified basement fire is so dangerous, that not only do we tell the first guy to go, or the first person to walk around the house and look, we send the third person, the third engine around the back, and the chief officer's checklist, it says send the 2nd Battalion chief to go look. It is so important, we're gonna send 3 independent sets of eyes to go look and confirm that there's no obvious sign of a fire in the basement. So if you take those first 4 things that I pointed out, and then you transpose those on Lorraine Avenue, what we had was a situation, and failure is the wrong word, but there was the inability to properly orient to the situation that was at hand. The clues were there. Smoke showing from a chimney is an uncontrolled basement fire until proven otherwise, just like, you know, abdominal pains in a woman of childbearing age is an ectopic pregnancy until proven otherwise. It's a heuristic, but it's true. When they do their circle check, they notice smoke in the basement. That by itself is not going to cause me a lot of concern, but right? But it is a clear sign of a fire in the basement. That combined with smoke from the chimney, right? There's a hole in the floor. Well, they're lightweight construction, there are holes in the floor all the time, but it didn't put itself there. It's more likely from a basement fire than it is from drop down from a ceiling or a fixture fire. All the clues were there. So if I have a concern, it's about, from my level, not about individual actions, but is there a way to better configure the system so that we don't miss these sort of clues and that we're able to put those pictures together and orient to the situation and make more reasonable decisions, right? I think there is, and I think that what later arriving engines should be thinking not so much about what do I have to do, but thinking about what have we missed so far, because you have the benefit of more time, right? The fifth
So
due
they
engine
almost
has
slow
more
down
time.
to speed up.
You have to slow down. We are running faster than our brains are able to process. And you guys in this current world, we talked about this a little bit before, what's different between now and when I was in the front seat? When I was in the front seat, I didn't want a stupid computer. I had one radio head, and it wasn't too hard, right? You know, I think we had the 800 megahertz system. I'm not even sure about that. And I did my patient care reports on paper. You guys are processing so much electronic information. It's a cognitive load is pretty high. You have got to build in time to slow down. And then if you don't mind me making one last point, and then I'll be done for the day. It talks about
You
this.
outrank both of us, so it's okay. All 3 of us, so it's okay.
So the one more point is this. If I could encourage people to do one thing, stop making value judgments and tell me what you see. Fire showing from a single room, fire showing from the 2nd floor, that doesn't tell me anything. Fire showing from 3 windows on the 2nd floor, that tells me something, right? Doesn't tell me the whole picture, but it told me a whole lot more. When you tell me there's smoke showing or light smoke showing, you are making a value judgment about what you're seeing, right? You are assigning meaning to that, and most of the time, it sets a tone for how things move downstream, and we accept what you say, right? When you tell me there's a hole in the floor, I accept what you say. You tell me there's a small hole in the floor, what does that do? It sort of minimizes the hazard associated with that hole. You tell me it's a big hole. Tell me what you see. I see a 4x6 hole. I see a hole that spans 3 floor joists, or I see a hole that's front to back. That allows me in the incident command post, the safety officer standing outside, the next to engine officer, that allows me to assign meaning to those things myself and not just rely on the meaning that you have assigned. And I think that if we could start doing that, what's transmission is richer with information. There's heavy smoke on the second floor, or I'm crawling on the second floor, the smoke is about 6 inches off and I can't see through it, right? We're talking about the same situation, but that second description is so much richer, has so much more information, and it allows me to make some value adjustments, because where am I finding my occupants? Well, I'm finding them most times in that 6-inch window, right?
Yep.
So that tells me there's still a chance to go do something. When the smoke is down to the floor and is completely opaque, I can't see through it, and I'm burning up, that tells me something else, right? Or the smoke is turbulent. So I think if you put all those things together, the fact that 2 firefighters fell through a hole is the least interesting part of the whole thing. All that demonstrates is that gravity works, and it will continue to work. What's really interesting is how we got to that point, and are there ways that we can manipulate the system, including ourselves, to get better orientation and kind of steer judgments in a different direction. And that concludes my,
Thanks.
dissertation.
So maybe not only
it's not a dissertation.
did our actions relate to the IRP,
Yeah.
were we able to communicate that effectively? Maybe we really need to include that in a lot of our discussion, the communication component. We seem to leave that out quite a bit. So
Well, and that's every report you pull, right? That mentions
they're
that.
all the
Yes,
same,
right.
basically.
Even the one that just got released the other day, right? NIOSH had a whole list of stuff, right? Same things.
And you remember what we did a couple years back?
It's a
Where
loaded
you-
question.
Where you tried on A shift to say, you're gonna sit in your car and say as little as possible and see
Right.
what difference that made. I'm a commander, I'm gonna say as little as possible. And what was interesting is that the percentage of time that he spent on the radio coordinating efforts,
Oh, that's right.
when he was saying as little as he thought, like being a minimalist, was about 30 to 33% of the radio talk time was taken up by the incident commander. And why does that matter? Because he was trying to say nothing. Chief McDonald at Arla Street, 33% of the radio talk time. Hamilton and Bailey at Cherubusco, 33%. And it's not just us. Nathan Flynn in Howard County did the same math. The incident commander chewed up 33% of the radio talk time, right? And then the other 66%, there was a lot of junk transmissions in there. And I think so one of the opportunities is to go back to that communication appendix and see what we can do there to streamline some of that.
All right. Chief Carrigan, anything?
I think they want us to go, Matt.
No, I'm straight, I'm open for questions, so email.
Did we have,
Unless
do
you
we
had-
have
unless you had
questions?
any-
We
No,
did,
had,
we almost,
we had a few comments, but everybody who's chatting can see the comments. It was more about platform delivery or whatever. I want to close out my part, and then I'll turn it over to the regular moderator, Cap Miller, to finish up the episode. So I think moving forward, right, and we've talked about this prior to this episode, is in our boss talks to be a little more cognizant of tying to the IRP. We have been some, but, just some more discussion of that.
Certainly.
As we ask questions, what did you think? How did this work out? Did you use the IRP and what
Or if you
aspect
didn't.
component? Or if you didn't, why?
If you didn't,
Yeah, right.
How do you justify that? Because that's gonna happen.
Yeah, right.
and it's okay to happen.
It's absolutely okay to happen.
Right. We had an interesting question come up not long ago. Does the IRP apply mutual aid? Right, so I'll hold that thought for some discussion. People can think about that, right? But I went mutual aid.
Can I just ask, in what sense?
I made a decision out of county based on my IRP and the decision that I made.
Okay.
Right? So out of the didn't fit the category of whatever, but I made this decision based upon, and I defend my decision based on the IRP. All right, so moving forward, we're going to try to do that, and I think really that's all we have to today, right? So we said we wanted to go back. We had an opportunity to address a number of things. We thought it was important, at least from Captain Miller and my perspective, to not fly blindly with this program and to hear from folks from above, and that's why we asked Chief Carrigan and Chief Bailey to be here, talk about operational side and policy training side, and that's really all that I have. Appreciate the folks that have hung in there. We've had quite a few people in stations watching, so appreciate that. So I'm going to turn it over to Captain Miller to close out. He'll talk about next coming episodes and his final thoughts.
So we did run a little long today. For those of you that stayed the entire time, thank you. Thank you again, Chief Bailey, Chief Carrigan. Thank you very much for joining us today. Later on this month, we have our next Challenges in the Streets. It is on the 28th. We will be live here at the training school at 1 o'clock. Lieutenant Martinez is doing a segment on ladders. And then right after that, or shortly after that, a week after that, is our next Boss Talk. We will again be here at the Training Academy, and we will discuss some first-in operations from a company officer standpoint, and we will tie in the IRP and initial actions and things like that. Until next time, thank you very much.